A puppy was about to be euthanized. When the vet saw what was in its collar, he broke down in tears. It was supposed to be another sad, routine day at the shelter, until that tiny dog's secret stopped everyone cold. The vet's hands began to shake. The thing inside the collar wasn't money. It wasn't a note. It was something impossible, something that tied this helpless animal to a tragedy he thought was buried forever. And when the shelter worker refused to let the puppy die, she had no idea she was stepping into a fight that could cost her everything. Behind one frightened dog hid a secret powerful people would do anything to erase, and a trail that leads straight into danger. What was hidden in that collar? And why did it make a grown man fall to his knees in tears? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun barely pierced through the grimy windows of Fairway County Shelter as Greer Landry pushed through the heavy double doors. The familiar smell of cleaning supplies and wet dog fur greeted her, along with the chorus of barks and whines that had become the soundtrack to her days. She pulled her worn notebook from her back pocket, flipping to today's list. 10 dogs had hit their 72-hour hold limit. Her throat tightened as she walked down the narrow concrete aisle, checking kennel numbers against her list. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, marking each one with a small red dot. The weight of what those dots meant pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. In the last kennel, a small shape caught her eye. The puppy huddled in the back corner, thin and trembling. Unlike the others who pushed forward hoping for attention, this one stayed still, watching her with wary eyes. Its coat was dull and patchy, and a weathered collar hung loose around its neck. Greer checked her paperwork again. "No one came for you either, buddy?" Her voice cracked as she unlocked the kennel door. The puppy didn't resist when she reached in, lifting its light body easily. As she cradled it against her scrub top, her fingers brushed something odd, a slight ridge in the collar's material that shouldn't be there. Frowning, she carried the pup to the prep room and set it gently on the metal exam table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Greer examined the collar more closely. There was definitely something hidden in the seam. With trembling fingers, she retrieved a pair of scissors from the supply drawer. "Let's see what we've got here," she murmured, carefully cutting along the uneven edge. The aged material split easily, revealing a small silver capsule tucked inside the lining. Her heart began to race. Was this evidence of smuggling? A hidden microchip? Dr. Hayes would know what to do. He always came in early to review cases before starting his rounds. Greer scooped up the puppy and the capsule, hurrying down the hallway to his office. "Dr. Hayes!" She knocked quickly before pushing the door open. He sat at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed patient charts. "I found something strange." He looked up, his weathered face curious but tired, the same expression he'd worn every day since she'd started working here. "What is it, Greer?" She set the puppy down and held out the capsule. "It was hidden in this dog's collar. I thought maybe it was a chip or—" Her voice trailed off as he took it from her hand. Dr. Hayes turned the small cylinder over, finding the twist mechanism with practiced ease. As it opened, something small and brass fell into his palm. Greer leaned closer, making out an engraving on its surface. "Never alone, Rhea H." The change in Dr. Hayes was instant and devastating. All color drained from his face as he stared at the token. His hands began to shake so badly that the capsule clattered to the desk. "Dr. Hayes!" Greer reached out uncertainly, but he didn't seem to hear her. A sound escaped him, something between a gasp and a sob, and he pressed his trembling fingers to his mouth. Tears welled in his eyes and spilled over, tracking down his cheeks in silent streams. "That's..." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's Ria's. My wife's." Another sob racked his body. "But she's been dead for..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he clutched the token to his chest and bent forward, shoulders heaving with grief that seemed fresh as yesterday. The puppy whined softly, pressing against Greer's legs as she stood frozen, watching the usually composed veterinarian break down completely. Greer's mind raced. Everyone knew Dr. Hayes had lost his wife, but he never spoke about it. Yet here was something of hers, hidden in a stray puppy's collar. The coincidence seemed impossible. She wanted to comfort him somehow. But what could she possibly say? So she just stood there, one hand resting protectively on the puppy's head, as Dr. Hayes's muffled sobs filled the small office, and the morning sun crept higher in the sky. The brass token glinted in his grip, a small thing to carry such enormous weight. Whatever this meant, Greer knew that everything had just changed. The routine morning she'd dreaded had transformed into something else entirely, something that had broken through Dr. Hayes's careful composure and revealed the raw grief he'd been carrying all this time. The silence in Dr. Hayes' office felt heavy with unspoken questions. Greer shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the puppy still pressed against her legs, as she watched the veterinarian struggle to compose himself. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Your wife..." 3 weeks ago. Dr. Hayes's voice was rough with emotion as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "A car accident. They said she lost control on Miller's Bend during that big storm." He drew a shaky breath, staring at the token as if it might vanish. But this was hers. Definitely hers. "What do you mean? Why would she have tokens hidden in dog collars?" Ria worked as a humane investigator. He traced the engraving with his thumb. She had this system. When she found animals that needed protection or might be evidence in a case, she'd mark them. These tokens were her promise to come back for them. The puppy whined softly, and Greer bent to scratch behind its ears. "But how did..." The office door swung open with a sharp crack. Marla Dent stood in the doorway, her steel-gray hair pulled back in its usual severe bun, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. "Dr. Hayes." "Greer." Her eyes narrowed at the puppy. "That animal's hold expired at midnight. The morning schedule is already behind." Greer's chest tightened. "Ms. Dent, we found something. Policy is clear." Marla's voice could have frozen water. "No exceptions without proper paperwork filed in advance. Now, either prepare that dog for euthanasia, or I'll assign someone else to do it." "No." The word burst from Greer before she could stop it. "This puppy might be evidence in something important. We can't just kill it." Marla's lips pressed into a thin line. "Evidence? Of what? A dirty collar and an unauthorized delay of procedure?" She turned to Dr. Hayes. "I expect better control over your prep staff, Doctor." "You can't do this." Greer stepped between Marla and the puppy. "I won't let you." "Miss Landry." Marla's voice dropped dangerously low. "This is your final warning. Follow procedure or face suspension for insubordination." "Then suspend me." Greer lifted her chin, heart pounding but voice steady. "I'm not moving." "Very well." Marla made a sharp note on her clipboard. "You're suspended without pay, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." She reached for the radio at her hip. "Wait." Dr. Hayes stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Though his eyes were still red, his voice had regained its professional authority. "As the attending veterinarian, I'm placing this animal under emergency medical hold for observation of possible infectious disease exposure." Marla's hand froze on the radio. What exposure? Given the unknown origin and condition of the collar, there's a risk of... He glanced at the puppy. Potential zoonotic transmission that requires 24-hour monitoring. The lie hung in the air between them. Marla's eyes narrowed to slits, but they all knew she couldn't override a medical decision without documentation and review. 24 hours, she bit out finally. Not 1 minute more. She spun on her heel and stalked out, leaving the door open behind her in silent command for Greer to follow. Go home, Dr. Hayes said quietly before Greer could speak. I'll watch the puppy. And Greer... He met her eyes. Thank you. Greer nodded, giving the puppy one last pat before reluctantly heading for the door. She glanced back to see Dr. Hayes sink into his chair, turning the token over and over in his hands. Alone in his office, Coulter Hayes felt the weight of grief pressing down on him again. But something else stirred beneath it now, a restless suspicion he couldn't shake. The token felt warm in his palm, familiar as Ria's smile, her laugh, her fierce dedication to protecting the vulnerable. He held it closer to the desk lamp, examining every detail. There, on the reverse side, barely visible, faint scratches formed a pattern. His breath caught. Numbers and a letter. 48B. His hands began to shake again, but not from grief this time. He knew this code, had seen Ria use it countless times in her case notes, tracking animals she was monitoring. She'd kept her official reports clean and professional, but her personal notation system was meticulous, detailed, and private. The puppy settled at his feet with a soft huff, and Coulter stared down at it. Why had Ria marked this dog? What had she discovered that required such secrecy? The accident that took her life replayed in his mind. The rain-slicked roads, the failed brakes, the guardrail that couldn't hold. He'd accepted the official report, too numb with loss to question. But now... What did you find, love? He whispered. What were you trying to tell me? The puppy looked up at him with solemn eyes, wearing a collar that had carried Ria's last message. Whatever she had uncovered had been important enough to protect with her special coding system. Important enough, perhaps, to silence her over. Coulter closed his fingers around the token, feeling its edges press into his palm. His grief wasn't gone, might never be gone, but it had crystallized into something harder, sharper, a determination to uncover what his wife had died trying to protect. He pulled a notebook from his desk drawer, hands steady now despite the storm of emotions in his chest. Whatever truth lay behind that 48B, he would find it. He owed Ria that much. And maybe, just maybe, this small puppy would help lead the way. Greer's hands trembled as she gripped her steering wheel, pulling into the back lot of Fairway Diner at dusk. The neon Open 24/7 sign cast a red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. Dr. Hayes had texted her to meet here, away from the prying eyes at the shelter. Her suspension meant she shouldn't even be near shelter business, but this was bigger than rules now. She spotted his weathered pickup in the corner, parked beside a massive blue truck she recognized as Bishop Crane's. The old volunteer's presence was unexpected but welcome. Bishop had been helping at the shelter for years, ever since getting his life back together. He knew every dark corner of the county's animal world. Inside, the smell of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around her as she made her way to their corner booth. Dr. Hayes, Coulter, as he'd asked her to call him, sat hunched over a manila folder, while Bishop's broad shoulders filled the sur opposite bench. "You're sure about this?" Bishop was saying as she slid in beside him. His trucker cap was pushed back, revealing concerned eyes. "Look at this." Coulter spread out several papers, his voice low but intense. Ria's coding system was meticulous. She marked every rescue with a number and letter combination. The numbers tracked the sequence, while the letters— He swallowed hard. The letters indicated threat level, A through D. "And our little friend was 48B, Greer whispered, leaning in. "High risk," Coulter confirmed. "Not immediate danger, but serious concerns. And look where 48 came from." He pointed to a carefully annotated map. Greer's breath caught. "Colby Ranch elite breeding. Commissioner Ira Colby's pride and joy," Bishop growled. "Man's got his fingers in every pot of money in this county, including the shelter's funding." "I saw him today," Greer said, her skin crawling at the memory. "He came by, acting like he was just making a routine check on shelter operations. But he asked about our puppy specifically, called it the unadoptable one, like he knew exactly which dog we were protecting." Coulter's hands clenched. "What else did he say?" "It wasn't what he said exactly. It was how he said it, like he owned that puppy already. When I told him it was under medical hold, something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. More like—" She searched for the right words. "Like a predator spotting prey," Bishop finished. "I've seen that look before. Man's got a reputation for making problems disappear." The waitress approached with coffee refills, and they fell silent until she moved away. Coulter pulled out a small notebook, its pages covered in Ria's neat handwriting. "Ria was investigating something big," he said. "These notes, they're careful, coded. But I can see patterns, multiple visits to Colby's property, references to shipping manifests, health certificates that didn't add up. She was building a case." "Against Colby?" Greer's voice rose slightly, and Bishop shushed her with a gentle elbow. "I think so, but she was being cautious. Whatever she found—" Coulter's voice cracked. "Whatever she found got her killed." The truth of it settled over their booth like a heavy blanket. Greer thought of Ria's token, safely hidden in Coulter's office with the puppy. A final message, a cry for help, delivered by an innocent animal. "So what's our next move?" Bishop asked, his gravelly voice steady and practical. "We need to see what Ria saw," Coulter said. "That property, there must be evidence of whatever she was investigating. But we can't just walk in." "Actually," Bishop adjusted his cap thoughtfully, "I might have a way. I do maintenance work sometimes, fixing fences and such for the local ranches, including Colby's. Nobody pays much attention to an old-timer with a toolbox." "That's too dangerous," Greer protested. "If Colby's behind Ria's death—" "All due respect, Missy, but I've faced worse than some rich man playing cowboy." Bishop's eyes held a steel that belied his gentle tone. "Besides, we need to move that pup somewhere safe. 24-hour hold won't last forever." "I can foster it," Greer offered quickly. "I've got the paperwork from previous fosters, and my landlord allows pets." Coulter shook his head. "Too obvious. Colby will check there first if the puppy disappears." He turned to Bishop. "But your place?" "Out past the county line. Nobody around for miles." Bishop nodded. "Plenty of room for a pup to lay low while we figure this out." They spent the next hour planning, speaking in low voices between sips of cooling coffee. Bishop would make a show of checking Colby's south fence line tomorrow, scouting the property's layout. Coulter would process the paperwork to transfer the puppy to a rescue partner, standard procedure for medical cases, but the transport would quietly detour to Bishop's place instead. "What about me?" Greer asked. "I want to help." "You've already risked your job," Coulter reminded her. "If Colby realizes we're investigating—" "Ria was investigating alone," Greer cut in. "Look what happened. We stick together on this." Bishop's weathered face creased in a smile. "Girl's got grit, Doc. We could use another set of eyes." Coulter studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we move carefully. Nobody takes unnecessary risks. We document everything we find, and at the first sign of real danger, we take it to the authorities. Assuming we can find authorities Colby doesn't own, Bishop muttered. They finalized their plans as the diner grew quieter, the evening crowd thinning out. Bishop would pick up the puppy tomorrow evening, disguised as a routine rescue transport. Greer would use her suspension time to discreetly gather information about Colby's breeding operation. And Coulter would keep digging through Ria's coded notes, looking for more clues about what she'd discovered. As they prepared to leave, Greer noticed Coulter's hands were steady as he gathered Ria's papers. The lost look in his eyes had been replaced by something stronger: purpose, determination, maybe even hope. Whatever Ria had died trying to expose, they would finish her work. Together. Bishop walked them to their cars, his truck's bulk shielding them from the street. "Watch your backs," he warned. "Rich men like Colby, they're used to buying their way out of trouble. When money doesn't work, they find other ways." Greer nodded, thinking of Colby's possessive tone when he'd asked about the puppy. The memory still made her shiver. But now she had allies. They had a plan. And somewhere in Ria's coded messages and that innocent puppy's collar, they had the beginning of the truth. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy clouds as Greer's old sedan pulled into the gravel driveway of a small farmhouse just outside town. Beside her, Coulter gripped a manila folder filled with shelter documents. In the back seat, Bishop kept a watchful eye on Lucky, who was curled up in a borrowed travel crate. "You sure about this, Doc?" Bishop asked, his voice rough with concern. "Ruthie Doss has been out of the system for years." "She knows every legal loophole in county code," Coulter replied. "If anyone can help us protect Lucky, it's her." Ruthie's house looked exactly as Greer had imagined. A cozy craftsman with wind chimes tinkling on the porch and carefully tended flower beds. The retired court clerk answered their knock wearing a flour-dusted apron, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun. "Well, if it isn't Dr. Hayes himself," Ruthie said, pushing her reading glasses up. Her keen eyes took in their worried faces. "And you've brought friends. Come in before the neighbors get curious." They gathered around her kitchen table, the smell of fresh-baked muffins filling the air. Lucky settled at Greer's feet while Coulter explained their situation. Ruthie listened intently, her expression growing darker as she heard about Ria's token and Colby's unexpected interest in the puppy. "Medical foster care?" Ruthie said finally, reaching for a thick binder from her bookshelf. Section 48.3 of the County Animal Welfare Code. It's meant for cruelty cases requiring extended veterinary oversight. She flipped through pages of legal text, pointing to a highlighted passage. Once registered as a medical foster case, no euthanasia can be performed without review by an independent veterinary board. Even Marla Dent can't override that. "But we need proof of medical necessity," Coulter said. Ruthie's eyes sparkled. "That torn ear of his needs careful monitoring for infection, doesn't it? And he's clearly undernourished. Could take weeks of documented weight checks to ensure proper recovery." Greer felt hope flutter in her chest. "Can you help us file the paperwork?" "Already ahead of you, dear." Ruthie pulled out several forms, her neat handwriting filling the margins with notes. "I'll need your signature here, Dr. Hayes. And yours too, Miss Landry, as the designated foster caregiver." As they worked through the documentation, Bishop kept watch by the window. The morning grew warmer, but Greer felt a chill when Ruthie mentioned the risks. "Colby's got friends in high places," the former clerk warned. "He's used to getting his way. Are you prepared for the backlash?" "We have to be," Greer said firmly, scratching behind Lucky's ears. "Whatever Ria found, it was worth protecting, worth dying for." Back at the shelter, whispers followed Greer through the corridors. She heard snippets of conversation cut off as she passed. career suicide, and should know better, and Coulter's throwing away his license. But she held her head high, Lucky's paperwork safely filed in triplicate. The tension grew when Marla Dent stormed into the break room, her face flushed with anger. "Commissioner Colby just called," she announced to the room at large. "He's concerned about our handling of strays, says we're being too lenient." Her eyes fixed on Greer. "He specifically mentioned your suspension, suggested I might want to make it permanent." "You can't touch Lucky now," Greer said steadily. "It's all legal and documented." "Nothing's untouchable," Marla snapped, "and neither is your job." She turned on her heel and left, but her words hung in the air like smoke. That evening, Coulter was the last to leave the clinic, double-checking Lucky's medical records before heading home. But when he arrived the next morning, he found the back door chained shut from the outside. Inside, filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered. Lucky's folder was gone. Every trace of the puppy's intake forms, medical notes, and foster care registration vanished. "They're getting desperate," Bishop observed, helping Coulter clean up the mess. "Means we're onto something." Greer hugged Lucky closer, the puppy's warm weight steadying her nerves. "But what? What did Rhea find that's worth all this?" "I don't know," Coulter said grimly, surveying the ransacked office. "But whoever did this proved one thing. We're not imagining the danger. Rhea wasn't just working on a simple abuse case. She found something bigger." "Good thing Ruthie made those extra copies," Bishop reminded them. "And good thing Lucky's safe at my place, not here." Greer nodded, but her heart raced. The break-in made everything real. The threat, the corruption, the possibility that Rhea's death was no accident. She looked at Lucky, remembering the hidden token that had started it all. What secrets had Rhea trusted to this small, brave puppy? What truth was worth such violence to conceal? The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, streaming through the clinic windows. In its light, the scattered papers and forced locks were stark evidence of how far their opponents would go. But as Greer helped restore order to the clinic, she felt her resolve harden. They had to find what Rhea discovered, not just for Lucky's sake, but for justice itself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the clinic windows as Coulter gently examined Lucky again. His hands moved methodically over the puppy's thin frame, checking for any signs they might have missed. The break-in had left him shaken, more careful than ever. "Hold still, little one," he murmured, as Lucky squirmed under his touch. His fingers brushed against the worn collar, the one that had already yielded such an impossible discovery. Something about its texture made him pause. "Greer," he called softly, not wanting to startle either the puppy or his assistant. "Come look at this." Greer crossed the room, her boots scuffing quietly on the linoleum. "What is it?" "Feel here." Coulter guided her fingers to a barely perceptible ridge in the collar's lining. "Another seam, different from where we found the token." Bishop leaned in from where he'd been keeping watch by the door. "Like the first one?" "Similar, but smaller." Coulter's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the surgical scissors. The memory of finding Rhea's token was still raw, but he forced himself to focus. With careful precision, he cut along the hidden seam. Inside, wrapped in a thin strand of blue thread, lay a glass tube no bigger than a matchstick. Coulter recognized the thread immediately. Rhea had always used it to secure her field notes. "She marked everything important with that blue thread," he explained, voice thick with emotion. "Said it helped her keep track in her investigation files." The glass ampule was sealed tight, protecting its contents from moisture. Coulter cracked it open with practiced care, extracting a small, damp piece of paper. The writing was faint but clear in Ria's familiar hand. Barn C, door seam, before first storm. Silence fell over the room as the words sank in. Lucky whimpered softly, pressing against Greer's leg. She knew, Greer whispered. She knew she might not make it back. This wasn't just about protecting evidence. She was leaving a trail. Coulter's jaw tightened. The thought of Ria planning for her own death, carefully hiding clues where only he might find them, sent a wave of grief and anger through him. But a trail to what? Bishop straightened up, his expression thoughtful. Barn C, that rings a bell. He pulled out his phone, thumbing through saved maps from his trucking days. There's an old property out past Miller's Creek. Used to be part of Colby's operation before they moved everything closer to town. The elite breeding facility? Greer asked. That's the one. 3 big barns, all abandoned now. They moved out maybe 6 months ago, right around when... He trailed off, glancing apologetically at Coulter. Right around when Ria died, Coulter finished quietly. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. Greer moved to the window, studying the gathering clouds. Those storms they've been warning about are coming in tonight. If there's something hidden in that barn... The access road floods, Bishop confirmed. First big rain, and it'll be cut off for days. They looked at each other, the urgency of the situation clear. Whatever Ria had hidden, they needed to find it before the storms hit. I can get us there, Bishop said. My truck can handle those back roads, at least for now. Coulter nodded slowly. We'll need supplies, flashlights, tools. His mind was already running through what Ria might have left, what they might find. I'll bring Lucky, Greer decided. If there's more hidden in that collar, we might need him. They moved quickly, gathering what they needed while trying not to draw attention. Greer packed a small bag with puppy supplies and first aid materials. Bishop checked his truck's emergency kit, adding extra flashlights and rope. Coulter retrieved his old field kit, the same type Ria had used during her investigations. As they worked, the wind picked up outside, rattling the clinic's windows. The approaching storm matched the growing tension they all felt. Whatever Ria had discovered at Barn C, it had been important enough to protect with her life. Important enough for someone to kill her over. Lucky sat quietly in his carrier, watching them with those soulful brown eyes. The puppy who had started as just another stray now carried the weight of Ria's final message, a key to unlocking whatever truth she'd died trying to expose. Bishop glanced at his weather app one last time. Storm's moving faster than they predicted. We've got maybe 3 hours before the heavy rain hits. Then we better move, Coulter said, securing the last of their supplies. He touched Ria's token in his pocket, drawing strength from it. After weeks of numbness and grief, he finally had purpose again. Whatever they found at Barn C, he would finish what Ria started. They loaded everything into Bishop's truck, making sure Lucky was secure in his carrier between Greer and Coulter in the back seat. As they pulled away from the clinic, the first few raindrops hit the windshield, nature's countdown to whatever waited for them in the abandoned barn. The late afternoon sun struggled against thickening clouds as Greer carefully laid out their evidence on the clinic's exam table. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged each item. Lucky's original intake tag with its telling time stamp, clear photos of the brass token from multiple angles, and Ria's rain-spotted note, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. We need backup, Coulter said, his voice steady but strained. Someone official who can document whatever we find. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at a name that made him pause. Del Walters. He's a state inspector who worked with Ria on previous cases. Greer watched as Coulter stepped away to make the call, his shoulders tense. Through the window, she could see Lucky curled up in Bishop's truck, the puppy's presence a constant reminder of why they were risking so much. The call was brief but productive. "Dell's meeting us there," Coulter announced, returning. "Says he's been looking for a reason to investigate Colby's operations for months." He gathered the evidence with careful hands, making sure everything was secure in his waterproof field case. The drive started in heavy silence. Bishop focused on the road ahead, while rain began to spatter against the windshield in earnest. Greer sat in the back with Lucky, who had finally fallen asleep in his carrier. Coulter stared out the passenger window, his reflection in the glass haunted. "I should have listened to her," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. His words came out rough, as if drawn from a deep well of pain. "Rhea tried to tell me about Colby, about the things she'd seen at his kennels." Greer leaned forward, her heart aching at the raw guilt in his voice. "What did she say?" "She had suspicions about his breeding program. Said the numbers didn't add up. Too many puppies vanishing from his records." Coulter's hands clenched in his lap. "I told her to be careful, to wait for more evidence, but I was too focused on my practice, on keeping the peace with local officials. I didn't want to believe someone so respected could be—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "Could be capable of such cruelty," Greer finished softly. "The night before she died, we argued about it. She wanted to go back to the old facility one last time." His voice cracked. "I told her to let it go. That's the last thing I ever said to her." The truck hit a rough patch of road, jostling them. Lucky whimpered in his sleep, and Greer instinctively reached out to steady his carrier. When she looked up, she found Coulter watching the gesture with an expression that made her throat tight. "You know what I see when I look at you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "I see someone who's choosing to face the truth now, even though it hurts. That takes real courage." Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating Coulter's face. The grief was still there. But something else too. A flicker of the man he must have been before loss hollowed him out. "Rhea would have liked you," he said quietly. "She always said the best people were the ones who fought hardest for those who couldn't fight for themselves." The compliment warmed Greer, despite the storm's chill. She thought about how far they'd come from that first moment in the shelter, from strangers united by a hidden message to partners in uncovering the truth. The trust between them felt as delicate and precious as Lucky's tiny heartbeat against her hand. Bishop turned onto a narrow dirt road, now turning muddy in the rain. 10 minutes out," he warned. "Road's getting worse." Greer checked their supplies one last time. Flashlights, ropes, evidence bags, and her phone set to record video. Everything they might need to document whatever waited for them at Barn C. The storm intensified, rain drumming on the roof as thunder rolled closer. But inside the truck, something steadier had taken root, a shared purpose that made them stronger than their individual fears. Whatever they found in that barn, they would face it together. For Lucky, for Rhea, and for all the voiceless ones who needed someone to stand up and fight. "Almost there," Bishop murmured as lightning split the sky again, briefly illuminating a dark structure in the distance. Coulter's hand found Greer's in the dim light, squeezing once, not in romance or even comfort, but in silent solidarity. They were ready. Bishop's truck lurched to a stop on the muddy track leading to Barn C. The rain hammered against the metal roof, creating an ominous drumbeat that matched Greer's racing heart. Through the water-streaked windshield, the barn loomed like a dark mountain against the storm-heavy sky. "This is it," Bishop said, killing the engine. "I'll keep watch while you two check inside." Coulter grabbed his medical bag and flashlight. "Stay close to the truck, Bishop. First sign of trouble, you signal us." The wind whipped at their clothes as they made their way to the barn's entrance. The huge door groaned on rusted tracks as they pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit them immediately, a thick, choking mixture of waste, illness, and despair that made Greer's eyes water. "Dear God," she whispered, fumbling for her phone to start recording. Coulter's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing row after row of wire cages stacked 3 high along both walls. Whimpers and weak barks echoed in the cavernous space. The light caught movement, dozens of eyes reflecting back at them, belonging to dogs of all sizes crammed into spaces too small for their bodies. "These cages," Greer's voice shook as she filmed. "They're barely big enough for them to turn around." She moved closer, documenting the creatures inside. Pregnant mothers with swollen bellies, puppies too young to be away from their mothers, all of them thin and scared. Coulter moved methodically down the rows, his veterinarian's training taking over despite the horror on his face. Severe malnutrition, signs of multiple untreated infections. He paused at one cage where a mother dog lay on her side, puppies weakly nursing. These animals need immediate medical attention. Greer's beam caught something metallic on a workbench. She moved closer, her phone steady as she filmed. "Look at this." A row of branding irons lay arranged by size, each bearing the same distinctive mark. "I see Ira Colby's initials." "He was branding them like cattle." "Evidence of ownership," Coulter said grimly. "No way he can deny these are his." They continued deeper into the barn, documenting everything. Greer found stacks of falsified breeding records, shipping manifests with international addresses, and medicine bottles with labels in foreign languages. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of the operation's scope. "Rhea was right about everything," Coulter said, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just cruel breeding, it's trafficking. Those foreign labels, the brands, the forged papers, he's been shipping dogs overseas." A particularly weak cry drew their attention to a corner cage. Inside, 3 puppies huddled together, their ribs showing through dull fur. They looked eerily similar to Lucky when they'd found him. These must be from the same litter, Greer realized. She knelt down, speaking softly to the frightened pups while filming their condition. "We're going to get you out of here, I promise." Coulter had just opened his bag to check the puppies when Bishop's urgent whistle cut through the rain. Headlights swept across the barn's exterior, casting long shadows through the gaps in the wooden walls. "Someone's coming," Greer whispered, though she kept filming. The crunch of tires on gravel grew louder. Car doors slammed outside, followed by voices made, sharp by anger. Greer recognized one immediately. Ira Colby's commanding drawl carried even through the storm. "Check the barn. If anyone's in there, flush them out." Coulter grabbed Greer's arm, pulling her behind a stack of empty crates. They crouched in the shadows as the barn door scraped open wider, letting in the storm and 3 flashlight beams. Greer could make out Colby's broad silhouette flanked by 2 other men, both carrying what looked like rifles. "We know you're in here." Colby's voice boomed through the barn, making the dogs cower. "Show yourselves now, and maybe we can work something out." Greer's hands trembled as she made sure her phone was still recording. Next to her, Coulter's breathing was steady, but tense. They were trapped, with armed men between them and the only exit. "Last chance," Colby called out. "Come out, or things get ugly real fast." Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the entire barn in stark detail. The suffering animals, the tools of cruelty, and the 3 men advancing with weapons ready. In that frozen moment, Greer saw the truth of what they'd stumbled into. this wasn't just about saving one puppy anymore. They'd uncovered something much darker, and Colby wasn't about to let them leave with that knowledge. Thunder crashed overhead as Colby's men moved deeper into the barn, their flashlights sweeping methodically across every shadow. The rain drummed against the roof like nature's own warning, and somewhere in the darkness, a dog began to howl. The sudden darkness hit like a physical blow as the generator died with a sputtering whine. The barn plunged into pitch blackness, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning through the gaps in the walls. The frightened whimpers of trapped dogs rose in pitch, echoing off the rafters. "Nobody moves!" Ira Colby's voice cut through the darkness. "This ends now!" A deafening crack split the air as his gun went off. The muzzle flash illuminated his face for a split second, twisted with rage and something darker. Sparks scattered across the dry straw littering the floor. Within moments, tiny flames began to dance and spread, fed by decades of dust and debris. "No!" Greer's horrified cry mixed with the increasing panic of the animals. The fire caught quickly, racing along the ground in jagged lines of orange light. Smoke began to curl upward, thick and choking. Coulter's voice came from somewhere to her left. "We have to get them out." He was already moving between the cages, coughing as he worked to release latches. The metal was hot to the touch, burning his fingers, but he didn't stop. The flames climbed higher, licking up the wooden support beams. Greer could hear Colby and his men shouting, their footsteps retreating toward the entrance. They were leaving, abandoning the animals to burn. A terrible groaning sound filled the air as one of the cage stacks began to collapse. Metal scraped against metal, and dogs yelped in terror. Through the sansurton, thickening smoke, Greer heard Lucky's distinctive cry, high and frightened, somewhere near the main door. "Lucky!" She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward the sound. The smoke was less dense near the floor, but sharp pieces of wire from the fallen cages bit into her palms. Blood made her hands slick, but she kept moving. "Greer!" Coulter's voice was hoarse from the smoke. "The roof's going to come down!" She reached the door, finding it chained shut from the outside. Lucky's cries were clearer now, joined by other dogs who had followed her toward the exit. The chain was pulled taut, impossible to break. Then Ria's message flashed in her mind. "Door seam." Her hands flew to the frame, feeling along its edges despite the pain. There, a slight irregularity in the wood. She dug her fingers in, finding a recessed bolt hidden in the seam. With a cry of effort, she wrenched it free. The door shuddered but held. The fire roared louder, consuming the barn's far end. The heat was becoming unbearable. "Bishop!" she screamed through a gap in the boards. "Ram it, now!" The answering roar of an engine cut through the storm. Headlights blazed through the cracks. The truck's engine revved higher. "Everyone back!" Coulter shouted, herding the loose dogs away from the door. The impact was explosive. Bishop's truck crashed through the weakened door in a shower of splintered wood. Rain and fresh air rushed in, making the flames dance wildly. Through the new opening, Greer could see Bishop jumping out of the cab, already moving to help. "Get the dogs out!" she yelled, grabbing Lucky and passing him to Bishop. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see, but she could feel more animals pressing against her legs, following the fresh air. Coulter appeared beside her, leading several dogs on makeshift leashes made from torn clothing. His face was black with soot, but his eyes were fierce with determination. Together they guided the animals toward freedom, while Bishop worked to open the remaining cages near the door. The fire had reached the roof now. Burning debris rained down, and the structure groaned ominously. They worked faster, ignoring their burns and cuts, focused only on saving as many lives as possible. Behind them, somewhere in the inferno, Ria's careful documentation of Colby's cruelty was turning to ash. But her final gift, that hidden bolt she'd discovered and marked for them to find, had given them all a chance at survival. The storm raged on outside, but its rain was a blessing now, helping to protect the rescued animals from the barn's intense heat. Thunder crashed overhead as they led the last of the dogs to safety, the blazing barn silhouetting their escape in fierce orange light. The wind whipped rain into their faces as they stumbled away from the burning barn. Behind them, flames reached toward the storm-dark sky, turning raindrops into glowing embers. Greer's legs trembled with exhaustion as she counted the rescued. Dogs huddled around them. Lucky pressed against her ankle, his wet fur matted with soot. A deafening crack split the air. The barn's roof collapsed inward, sending a cascade of sparks into the night. The sound made the dogs whimper and crowd closer. Coulter's hand found Greer's shoulder, steadying her as they watched years of cruelty burn away. Through the curtain of rain, headlights suddenly pierced the darkness. Multiple vehicles were approaching fast, their tires throwing mud in their wake. Greer's heart leaped when she recognized the lead SUV. Del Walters, the state inspector, had made it through the storm. "There!" Bishop shouted, pointing towards the tree line. Two figures were running through the downpour, Ira Colby and one of his men, heading for a hidden service road. Lucky's head snapped up at Bishop's cry. Before anyone could react, the small dog bolted after Colby, a streak of determination in the rain. Colby noticed the pursuit too late. Lucky lunged, teeth catching the sleeve of his expensive jacket. The force of the attack, combined with the slick ground, sent Colby sprawling into a muddy drainage ditch. "No, get off me, you worthless mutt!" Colby thrashed, but Lucky held firm, growling with a ferocity that seemed impossible from such a small creature. Walter's vehicle skidded to a stop, and deputies poured out with weapons drawn. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Colby's accomplice tried to double back, but slipped in the mud. Two officers tackled him while others surrounded Colby, who was still struggling in the ditch. Lucky finally released his grip only when Greer called him back, trotting to her side with his head held high. "Good boy," she whispered, kneeling to embrace him despite her exhaustion. Such a good, brave boy. More vehicles arrived. Animal control vans, fire trucks, and additional police units. Their emergency lights painted the rain in alternating red and blue. Coulter handed over their footage to Walters, his hands shaking slightly as he described what they'd found inside the barn. "We'll need your full statements," Walters said, "but first let's see what our friend was trying to take with him." He nodded toward Colby's truck, which sat abandoned near the barn's remains. The search revealed damning evidence in the vehicle's cab. Hidden under the seat were detailed ledgers recording illegal breeding operations, sales to underground fighting rings, and kickbacks to shelter officials. A locked box in the glove compartment contained vials of sedatives, the same kind found in Ria's system after her accident. But the most damning discovery was a thick folder of shelter documentation. Page after page of falsified euthanasia records bore Marla Dent's signature, proving her role in the scheme. She had been marking Colby's fighting dogs as destroyed while allowing him to claim them for his operation. "My God," Walters muttered, flipping through the pages. "This goes back years." Coulter's face was a mask of grief and fury as he recognized dates matching Ria's investigation timeline. "She knew," he said softly. "She knew what they were doing, and they killed her for it." The adrenaline that had kept Greer going finally drained away. Her legs buckled, and she sank to her knees in the mud, pulling Lucky close. The puppy licked her face, his warm presence anchoring her as the full weight of what they'd accomplished washed over her. Coulter knelt beside them, his shoulders slumping as if a great burden had lifted. For the first time since they'd met, his eyes were clear of the haunted shadow that had clouded them. He reached out to scratch Lucky's ears, and the simple gesture seemed to hold years of healing. "She would be proud," Greer said quietly, watching the officers lead Colby toward a waiting patrol car. "Rhea, I mean. She never gave up, and neither did you." Coulter's breath caught, but his voice was steady when he replied. "Neither did you, or this little warrior." He smiled as Lucky wagged his tail, leaving muddy paw prints on both their legs. The rain began to ease, though thunder still rolled in the distance. Emergency workers moved efficiently around them, documenting the scene and caring for the rescued animals. Each flash of lightning illuminated the barn's smoking skeleton, a monument to corruption exposed and justice finally served. In the ditch where Lucky had caught him, Colby's expensive boots stuck out at odd angles as deputies hauled him to his feet. His face was a mask of impotent rage as they recited his rights. The man who had wielded so much power now stood revealed in the harsh emergency lights, just another criminal caught in his own web of cruelty. State police were already coordinating with other jurisdictions, preparing to raid Colby's additional properties. His network was crumbling, and with it, the wall of silence that had protected his operation for so long. In the back of a patrol car, his accomplice was already offering to talk in exchange for leniency. Walters approached them again, his notepad already damp from the rain. "When you're ready, we'll need to go over everything. There will be trials, testimony." He paused, looking at their exhausted faces. "But that can wait until morning. You've done enough for tonight." Greer nodded, too tired to speak. Coulter's hand found hers, offering silent support. Lucky settled between them, his small body trembling with fatigue, but his eyes bright with unconditional love. Together they watched as justice, delayed but not denied, finally arrived on this storm-swept night. 6 weeks after the stormy night at Barn C, sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows of Fairway County Animal Shelter. The building felt different now, brighter, more hopeful. Gone were the shadowy corners and hushed whispers of despair. In their place, cheerful volunteer chatter and the occasional happy bark echoed through freshly painted hallways. Greer stood in her small office, adjusting a framed certificate on the wall. "Foster Network Coordinator," it read, making official what she'd known in her heart all along. This was her calling. Under her guidance and Coulter's supervision, the shelter had transformed. Every animal now had a chance, just as Rhea had always believed they should. The sound of clicking nails on linoleum made her turn. Lucky trotted in, his once matted coat now glossy and full. The torn ear had healed into a rakish tilt that gave him character, and his eyes sparkled with the joy of a dog who knew he was loved. He carried his favorite rope toy, tail wagging as he dropped it at her feet. "There's my brave boy," Greer laughed, bending to scratch his chest. "Taking a break from clinic duty?" The answer came from the doorway, where Coulter leaned against the frame. He looked younger these days, the weight of grief lifting gradually from his shoulders. He insisted on visiting. Who am I to argue with such determination? They shared a smile, remembering how that same determination had saved them all. The investigation into Colby's operation had revealed a network of corruption stretching across 3 states. But more importantly, it had exposed the truth about Rhea's death, and in doing so, had set them free to build something new from the ashes. "I have something to show you," Coulter said softly. "If you've got a minute?" Greer nodded, following him down the hall to his office in the clinic wing. Lucky padded along beside them, ever the faithful companion. The space was neat and organized, with one wall devoted to medical certificates and shelter protocols. But it was the small corner desk that drew her eye today. There, in a simple silver frame, sat a photograph of Rhea. She was captured mid-laugh, auburn hair catching the sun, her eyes bright with purpose. Beside it, mounted carefully on a small wooden plaque, hung the brass token that had started everything. Never alone, still clearly visible despite the scratches it had acquired during Lucky's journey. Coulter touched the frame gently. I found her last letter this morning. It was tucked away in her field notes, dated the day before. He swallowed hard. I thought you should see it. The paper was creased but carefully preserved, Rhea's handwriting flowing across the page. My dearest, if you're reading this, then my fears were justified. But remember, the work we do lives on in every life we save. You are never alone in this fight. Love finds a way, even in the darkest places. Keep your heart open. R. Greer felt tears well up as Coulter's voice cracked. She was right, he said. About everything. I'd closed myself off after losing her, convinced that nothing good could survive in a world that took her from me. But then you and Lucky proved me wrong. He turned to face her, emotion raw in his voice. You didn't just save his life, Greer. You saved mine too. You brought back my faith in doing good, in fighting for what matters. Thank you. Lucky pressed against their legs, sensing the moment's weight. Greer knelt to hug him, using the motion to gather her thoughts. When she stood, her smile was steady despite her tears. We saved each other, she said simply. All of us. That's what Rhea understood, that love and courage can transform everything they touch. Lucky taught me that too. The puppy's tail thumped against the floor, his presence a living reminder of how one small life could change everything. He was more than just a survivor now. He was proof that hope could bloom even in the hardest places. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching the brass token and making it glow. Its message seemed to pulse with new meaning, a promise kept, a legacy honored, and a future built on the foundation of one woman's unwavering conviction that every life mattered. Together they had transformed a place of endings into one of new beginnings, and in doing so, they had transformed themselves. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.